They smiled as if I belonged, yet every seat at the table proved otherwise. My name was missing from the board minutes, my face cropped out of the glossy IPO poster, my voice dismissed as too disruptive. I learned to sip water and nod while they praised my brother's genius with research I had written in secret. But silence has a breaking point, and mine came when I discovered the contract he signed, an agreement that would trade human freedom for profit. What they never saw coming was that my pen, not his, could decide their empire's fate. The chandeliers above the ballroom glowed with a sterile kind of warmth, the kind that could blind you if you mistook it for love. Gold-trimmed banners fluttered with the company's new slogan, "Family builds the future," and cameras panned across the Hartleys as though we were the embodiment of unity. My mother had chosen matching midnight blue gowns for herself and my sister-in-law, while I was ushered toward a seat at the far edge of the banquet table, half hidden behind an arrangement of lilies. The photographer lifted his lens, and I caught my reflection in the glass, present but peripheral, like a watermark too faint to matter. When the speeches began, my father's voice boomed with authority, naming Marcus, my older brother, as the architect of our company's dazzling rise. Applause erupted, champagne glasses clinked, and for a moment I felt like a guest at my own life. I knew the truth. The algorithm Marcus bragged about had been stitched together from research papers I had authored during sleepless nights, papers my father had insisted we publish internally to protect intellectual property. But the truth was buried under velvet curtains and strategic smiles, while Marcus basked in a spotlight borrowed from me. As the cameras swiveled toward the stage, Marcus leaned in my direction with a grin sharpened by arrogance. "Don't worry, Elena," he whispered so only I could hear. "There's always PR work. You've got the right smile for it." His words landed like ice water on my chest. I forced a smile for the audience, but inside I was trembling with a fury I could not show. The dinner stretched on, each course plated with precision, each toast punctuated with reminders that the IPO was just weeks away. When dessert arrived, I excused myself to the balcony, needing air thick with something other than performance. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent neon, reminding me there was a world beyond this gilded cage. I pressed my hands against the railing and let the cool night anchor me, but the sting of exclusion burned hotter with every breath. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email mistakenly forwarded to me. The subject line read, "Board approval, new governance structure." My heart raced as I scrolled. It confirmed what I had feared. Marcus was to be announced as a permanent board member, his seat secured by our parents' signatures. My own application, which had taken months of preparation, was dismissed with a single line, "Not aligned with company direction." My throat tightened. They hadn't even offered me a token interview. I returned inside, careful to hide my turmoil beneath the mask I had perfected over years of practice. The band played a smooth jazz rendition of a classic tune. Couples swayed on the dance floor, and the cameras returned to capture a tableau of familial harmony. My mother caught my eye from across the room and gave a small, rehearsed smile that asked me to behave. I obliged, raising my glass in a mimicry of celebration, though the taste of champagne soured on my tongue. Later, when the guests began to disperse, my father summoned me to his office adjoining the ballroom. The shelves were lined with leather-bound volumes he had never read, trophies engraved with Marcus's name, and a family portrait where I was positioned slightly behind everyone else, as though depth could diminish presence. He gestured for me to sit, but didn't wait for me to settle before speaking. "Elena," he began, his tone measured, "we appreciate your contributions, but the board has decided the company needs stability. Marcus represents that stability." Stability? My voice cracked despite my effort to keep it steady. "He doesn't even understand half the systems I designed. You know that." My father sighed, as though burdened by my persistence. "You're brilliant, but brilliance doesn't always translate to leadership. You question too much. Investors prefer certainty." I wanted to scream that certainty built on deception was nothing but rot, but his eyes, steel gray and unwavering, reminded me how futile rebellion could feel under this roof. So I swallowed my anger, nodded once, and stood. As I left the office, Marcus was waiting in the hallway, his posture smug, his tie loosened just enough to signal victory. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, a mockery of brotherly affection. "Better luck next time, sis," he said. "Or maybe stick to writing white papers. Some of us were born to lead." I brushed past him, refusing to let his words brand themselves into me. My heels echoed against the marble floor, each step a reminder that I was walking deeper into exile within my own family. Back in my apartment later that night, I stared at the city skyline, its lights flickering like promises I no longer trusted. I opened my laptop, intending to bury myself in freelance consulting work, but my inbox flashed again. Another email, this one from a junior analyst inside the company, subject line, "You should see this." Attached was a preliminary draft of a contract Marcus had signed, an agreement with a foreign government notorious for surveillance programs. The clauses outlined data access rights that could strip millions of people of privacy, all in exchange for fast-tracked investment. My chest tightened as the realization sank in. This wasn't just about me being excluded. This was about a betrayal that reached beyond family, into the lives of people who would never know my name. The city lights outside blurred through my tears, but beneath the ache, a spark ignited. They thought they had silenced me, hidden me behind flowers, erased me from posters. They didn't know I still held pieces of leverage they hadn't noticed. And they didn't know that their empire's survival depended on the one person they had dismissed as irrelevant. Rumors travel faster than truth, especially when whispered by those with the loudest microphones. A week after the gala, a slick online article appeared. Elena Hartley, riding family coattails. The piece accused me of exaggerating my contributions, painting me as the pampered daughter who mistook proximity for achievement. I read it 3 times in disbelief, each line twisting like a knife, until I reached the final quote, an unnamed senior executive claiming I had no leadership instincts. I didn't need to guess who had fed that line. The cadence was pure Marcus, polished arrogance masquerading as fact. The fallout spread quickly. Invitations to strategy calls evaporated from my calendar. Then, my company email was abruptly suspended, pending reauthorization. When I called IT, they claimed they were just following orders. Even my ID badge, once a symbol of belonging, now beeped red at the office doors. It was a systematic erasure, clean and deliberate. At a family dinner days later, the performance continued. My mother passed me a plate of roasted chicken, smiled sweetly, and whispered, "Ignore the noise, darling. Focus on your strengths." Across the table, Marcus raised his glass, his smirk daring me to contradict the narrative he'd crafted. My father joined the toast, eyes avoiding mine, his silence louder than any condemnation. I chewed slowly, each bite flavored with humiliation. Back home, exhaustion pressed down like a physical weight. Nights bled into mornings without sleep, my mind looping through scenarios of defense, rebuttal, vindication. I considered writing a public statement, but stopped myself. Any protest would be twisted into confirmation of guilt. Alone in my apartment, I scribbled a letter to my mother. "Do you ever see me, or only the image of me you've been told to love?" I folded the paper but didn't send it, sliding it into a drawer with all the other unsent pleas of my adulthood. The following Monday, my body finally betrayed me. During a routine press conference where I'd been relegated to handling background slides, my vision tunneled. The screen blurred, the room tilted, and I collapsed. Gasps filled the air. When I woke in the medical wing, a doctor gently informed me I had fainted from exhaustion and stress. My father visited briefly, his words more reprimand than comfort. "You need to learn resilience, Elena. Public weakness invites scrutiny." He left before I could respond, the door clicking shut with finality. That night, while lying in the sterile hospital bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It contained a single attachment, a PDF titled IPO Governance Structure. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside was a clause I hadn't seen before, tucked away in dense legal jargon. It granted sweeping authority to Marcus in the event of emergency executive decisions, effectively locking him in as the sole decision-maker once the company went public. I scrolled further, nausea rising. The document included draft agreements with foreign entities, each promising lucrative funding in exchange for data concessions. My name was nowhere, scrubbed clean as though I had never existed. For a brief moment, despair dragged me under. I imagined the headlines once the IPO launched, Marcus celebrated as the visionary while my work became invisible ink. The weight of it threatened to crush me. Yet as the despair settled, something else stirred, a stubborn ember of defiance. I remembered the analyst's email from the week before, the one that hinted at deeper rot. Maybe I wasn't entirely powerless. 2 days later, still weak but determined, I returned to my apartment. On my desk, a brown envelope awaited me. Inside was a stack of printed emails and a note scrawled in messy handwriting. "They won't stop until you disappear. Protect yourself. Use this." The emails detailed Marcus's communications with a foreign government, outlining shortcuts to bypass safety testing in exchange for expedited rollout. One message even included my name, twisted into a scapegoat if the deal ever went public. If questioned, we'll attribute delays to Elena's hesitations. She never supported the plan. My hands shook as I read, bile rising in my throat. The betrayal was total. Not only was I excluded, I was being positioned as the convenient fall guy for corruption I had opposed from the start. My family's love, if it had ever been love, was now a polished weapon aimed squarely at me. That evening, as rain streaked down the windows, Marcus arrived unannounced at my door. He carried himself like a victor inspecting the battlefield. "You've been quiet," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "That's good. Stay quiet. Don't embarrass the family, and maybe you'll get a small piece of the pie after the IPO." I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. "You're trading people's freedoms for profit. Do you even hear yourself?" He laughed, a sound slick with superiority. "The world doesn't run on freedom, Elena. It runs on leverage. Learn that, and maybe you won't spend the rest of your life writing white papers no one reads." When he left, slamming the door behind him, I sat in silence, the apartment echoing with emptiness. My reflection in the window looked foreign, eyes rimmed red, shoulders hunched, spirit fraying. Yet deep within, the ember of defiance glowed brighter. They had underestimated me, erased me, and even scripted me as their scapegoat. But they had also handed me something more dangerous than they realized. Proof. As I gathered the scattered papers and tucked them into a locked drawer, I whispered to myself, "If they want war, they'll learn I'm not the one to discard." The day of the board meeting arrived cloaked in pageantry. Cameras lined the lobby, reporters clustered like vultures, and the family appeared in perfect synchronization. Marcus with his gleaming smile, my father with his controlled gravitas, my mother in a pearl necklace that glowed under the lights. I walked 2 steps behind them, a silent shadow, my badge reactivated only for the sake of appearances. Inside, the boardroom smelled of polished wood and power. The agenda was clear: ratify the final contracts before the IPO. As the meeting commenced, Marcus took the lead, his voice confident, rehearsed, the words rolling off his tongue as though he'd crafted the agreements himself. Slides flashed on the screen, displaying growth projections, international partnerships, and promises of unprecedented market penetration. Applause punctuated each segment, board members nodding along, intoxicated by numbers. I sat in silence until the next slide appeared. Strategic Expansion Surveillance Contract. My breath caught. There it was, outlined in corporate jargon, buried beneath euphemisms. Our company's deal with a regime known for silencing dissent. I raised my hand, the act itself a small rebellion. "Can someone clarify?" I began, my voice steady though my heart raced. "What protections are in place for the citizens whose data will be harvested under this contract?" A hush swept the room. Marcus chuckled, the sound rehearsed for condescension. "Elena, always the philosopher. This isn't about abstract ethics. It's about shareholder value. The protections are implied." My father cleared his throat, signaling the discussion was closed. "We've already vetted this, Elena. Don't derail the process." Something inside me cracked. The veneer of family, the illusion of unity, it shattered in that instant. My father's words weren't protective. They were dismissive, final. I wasn't a daughter. I was an obstacle. I left the meeting before it concluded, the board's applause echoing like hammers striking nails into a coffin. In the hallway, I leaned against the cool marble, my chest tight, my vision blurring. Years of striving, of hoping they would see me, all dissolved into the realization that they never intended to. My entire life had been built around a lie, that family loyalty equated to love. That evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, an email popped into my inbox. It was from my father, mistakenly forwarded. The subject line, "Concerns about Elena." My hands trembled as I read. "She's too strong-willed. Don't ever give her decision-making authority. It will destabilize everything we've built." It was dated years earlier, back when I first applied for leadership roles. My stomach twisted. All those denials, all those polite rejections had not been about qualifications. They had been about fear. My own father feared me. The betrayal hollowed me out. I replayed childhood memories, piano recitals where my mother clapped distractedly, science fairs where my father congratulated Marcus for helping me build models I had constructed alone. Every smile, every pat on the shoulder reframed itself as a calculated act to keep me contained. I wasn't invisible by accident. I had been deliberately erased. By midnight, despair had me pinned. I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, the letter to my mother still folded in the drawer. "Do you ever see me?" I whispered into the dark, but no one answered. For a moment, I wondered if disappearing altogether might be easier. No more fighting, no more proving, no more waiting for recognition that would never come. The thought scared me, yet it lingered, heavy and persuasive. The following morning, my phone buzzed with another message, this time from the journalist I had cautiously shared fragments of my research with weeks earlier. "Elena, we found something. It's your draft paper on AI ethics. It was hidden in company archives, misattributed to Marcus. Do you want us to publish it?" I stared at the screen, heart hammering. My paper, my voice, had been buried but not destroyed. The journalist's words pulled me back from the edge. Proof of my existence, of my contributions, still lived. If they had gone to such lengths to silence me, then perhaps my voice carried more weight than I had allowed myself to believe. But the paradox clawed at me. To release the paper would mean open war with my family, a rupture that could never be repaired. To stay silent meant continuing as their scapegoat, their expendable narrative. That night, as I sat at the piano in my apartment, fingers tracing keys that hadn't sung in years, I remembered a moment from childhood. My mother had leaned over me, whispering, "You are special, Elena. Don't ever dim yourself." The memory clashed with the present, but it also reminded me, perhaps my power had always been a threat because it was real. Tears blurred my vision as I played a broken melody. I wasn't ready to fight, not yet, but I was no longer willing to surrender to despair. Somewhere between the hollow betrayal and the rediscovered paper, I felt a seed take root. A small, defiant promise that I would not vanish. When the final notes faded, I sat in silence, the city lights flickering beyond the window. My phone buzzed again, another email from the journalist. "We'll wait for your signal. The world deserves to know." I closed the lid of the piano, exhaled deeply, and whispered to the empty room, "Not yet, but soon." The research paper sat open on my desk, its margins filled with notes written in my own cramped handwriting. Seeing my words again after so many years felt like touching a pulse I thought had long gone silent. The arguments were sharp, uncompromising. Technology must serve humanity, not control it. Reading them reminded me that I had once believed my voice mattered. I hadn't been erased because I was irrelevant. I had been buried because I was dangerous. A slow anger coiled inside me, not the kind that consumed, but the kind that clarified. They had spent years convincing me I was too much, too disruptive, too unfit for leadership. But staring at the paper, I saw myself with new eyes. I wasn't asking for their recognition anymore. I didn't need Marcus's shadow to measure my worth, nor my father's approval to validate it. Their rejection no longer defined me. When the journalist called, her voice was urgent but warm. "Elena, your paper is groundbreaking. We can't publish without your consent, but the world deserves to hear this." For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like someone holding a weapon I hadn't realized I possessed. Later that afternoon, I met with Aaron, an old colleague turned human rights lawyer. He looked older than I remembered, silver threading his beard, but his eyes were steady. I spread the documents across the cafe table. Contracts, board minutes, the incriminating emails Marcus thought he had hidden. Aaron scanned them silently, then leaned back. "You realize," he said, "this isn't just corporate malpractice. This is human rights abuse disguised as innovation." Beside him, the journalist nodded, "And once it goes public, there's no way they can spin it." I folded my hands together to keep them from trembling. "Then we go public." Aaron's expression darkened. "Not yet. There's something you need to understand first." He pulled a binder from his bag and slid it toward me. Inside was a legal document with my name scrawled across the signature line. Confusion tightened in my chest. "What is this?" "Supply chain contracts," he explained. "Your signature is still listed as the final authority for procurement, a remnant from when you worked as consultant before Marcus took over. Without it, the IPO doesn't pass regulatory compliance. They can't go public unless you sign off. Elena, whether they know it or not, you hold the key." The room seemed to tilt. All this time, I had believed I was powerless, a ghost watching from the sidelines. Yet here was proof. The IPO, the empire my family had built, could collapse without me. A surge of conflicting emotions rose: fear, relief, exhilaration. I had leverage, but leverage carried weight. Could I carry it? Did I want to? I glanced at Aaron and he held my gaze. "You have a choice. That's more than they ever gave you." That night, back in my apartment, I laid out every piece of evidence: emails, drafts, financial projections. I arranged them like puzzle pieces, each one connecting to the next. The story they told was clear: an empire built on betrayal, its foundation cracked wide open. My task was not only to expose it, but to decide how. The temptation to act quickly tugged at me, but Aaron's voice echoed, "Timing is everything." If we released the information before the IPO, the collapse would be catastrophic, undeniable, public. Waiting meant enduring the charade a little longer, but it also meant maximum impact. I looked at my reflection in the window, tired eyes, shoulders tense. But this time, I didn't see weakness. I saw someone scarred, but still standing. Not a warrior without feeling, but a woman who had endured enough to finally fight back. To strengthen myself, I began a ritual. Each morning, I walked through the park near my building, breathing in the cold air, reminding myself that I existed outside their narrative. Each night, I wrote in a journal, not the letters of desperation I had once hidden, but declarations of intent. I am not invisible. I will not be erased. The words became armor, not to harden me into stone, but to remind me I was still human. Days later, as I sifted through yet another folder of contracts, my apartment buzzer sounded. The voice that followed chilled me instantly. "It's Marcus. Let me in." Against my better judgment, I opened the door. He stepped inside, his suit immaculate, his smile sharp as glass. "You've been busy," he said, eyes flicking to the scattered papers. "Collecting evidence, talking to journalists, dangerous hobbies, sister." I didn't respond. He circled the room like a predator testing the perimeter. Then he stopped in front of me, lowering his voice. "You think you can take us down? Fine. But remember this, if you kill the IPO, you kill them too. Mom and Dad. Everything they've worked for, gone. Can you live with that?" His words landed heavy, calculated to wound. I felt the tremor in my hands, but held his gaze. He wanted me to see myself as the executioner, the ungrateful daughter who destroyed her family. But beneath the fear, the ember of defiance burned steady. He leaned closer, his whisper cutting like a blade. "So tell me, Elena, do you dare?" The door slammed behind him, leaving the question hanging in the air, sharper than any ultimatum I'd ever faced. The night of the IPO arrived, wrapped in glitter and deception. The stock exchange hall gleamed under chandeliers, cameras flashed, and my family stood on the stage as if they were royalty about to anoint themselves. Marcus wore a smile carved from marble, his hand raised to the crowd. My parents, elegant and serene, radiated triumph. They didn't know the avalanche already rolling toward them. At precisely 9 p.m., the embargo lifted. The journalists I had entrusted with the documents released their stories simultaneously across every major outlet. Headlines screamed in unison. Hartley AI in secret surveillance deal. IPO built on human rights violations. Ethics paper buried by Hartley family. Screens in the exchange lit up with the scandal, whispers sweeping through the crowd like wildfire. Investors' phones rang, their eyes narrowing as numbers began to plummet. I stood among them, invisible but present, watching as the empire fractured in real time. Within minutes, the share price collapsed, buyers pulling out, banks freezing lines of credit. The lucrative surveillance contract that had once promised billions was suspended pending investigation. My father's proud smile stiffened, Marcus's practiced confidence faltered. I stepped forward, not onto the stage, but before the cluster of microphones gathered at the edge. My voice carried, amplified by the silence of a room teetering on chaos. "Technology should not be built on blood and silence," I declared. "The future cannot be founded on betrayal." Gasps rippled through the room, the cameras turning toward me, the forgotten daughter suddenly the center. But the triumph was fleeting. My father, red-faced, stormed down from the stage. He seized a microphone, his voice booming with fury. "That is my daughter," he shouted, "and she is a traitor. She has destroyed her family for vengeance." His words sliced through the room, reframing the narrative in an instant. Reporters scrambled to capture both sides, the spectacle now a family civil war in public. For a heartbeat, I felt exposed, stripped bare by the man whose approval I had once chased. But then I saw the faces in the crowd, some skeptical, some outraged, but many nodding, listening. My father's roar could not drown out the evidence already released, evidence too damning to ignore. Still, his betrayal twisted deeper than any headline could wound. The fallout was immediate. Online, the reaction split like shattered glass. One half of the world cursed my name, calling me disloyal, ambitious, cruel. The other half hailed me as a whistleblower, a woman brave enough to expose her own bloodline for the sake of truth. Hashtags trended, memes spread, and my face became both a symbol of courage and a dartboard for hate. Inside the company, chaos reigned. Marcus was stripped of his role within days, his leadership deemed untenable under the scandal's weight. My parents, once untouchable, were voted out of the board, their decades of control dissolved in a single motion. I watched from afar as they scrambled, issuing desperate statements, blaming rogue employees, even hinting that I had fabricated documents. None of it stuck. The cracks were too wide, the evidence too undeniable. Yet the personal cost gnawed at me. Old friends stopped calling, unwilling to stand in the firestorm. Extended relatives left messages dripping with anger or pity. My father's public condemnation replayed on every channel, his words hammering at my chest. Traitor, betrayer, destroyer. In quiet moments, the echo of those labels tested my resolve. One evening, as I scrolled through the torrent of reactions, a notification appeared, a message request from an unfamiliar name. Curious, I opened it. The sender was a venture capitalist with a reputation for bold investments. His words were succinct. "Elena, I admire your courage. The old empire is crumbling. Lead something new. Let me fund you." I read it again and again, my pulse quickening. The offer was more than money. It was validation, a chance to build without chains, to prove that my vision didn't need the Hartley name to survive. But the weight of the choice pressed hard. To accept meant stepping fully into a future defined by me, not them. To refuse meant walking away forever, leaving the battlefield scorched, but never planting anything new. I closed the message without replying, staring out the window as the city lights blinked like questions with no easy answers. For the first time in my life, the power was mine alone. The only question that remained was whether I dared to use it. The weeks following the IPO collapse unfolded like a reckoning scripted by fate. Regulators descended on Hartley AI, combing through contracts, internal communications, financial ledgers. Headlines shifted from speculation to certainty. Hartley Empire under federal investigation. Stock prices, once poised for meteoric rise, sank into freefall. Shareholders demanded answers, but there were none that could patch the holes torn wide open. The empire that had seemed untouchable was unraveling, stitch by stitch. Yet amid the wreckage, voices began to rise, voices I hadn't expected. Former employees, once silenced by non-disclosure agreements or fear of retaliation, stepped into the light. A systems engineer gave an interview. Elena always pushed for ethical safeguards. We were told to ignore her. A compliance officer released a statement. She was the only one who fought to protect user data. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. The caricature of me as traitor softened, replaced by glimpses of the truth I had lived all along. I felt the tide turning not through headlines, but through letters. Emails arrived daily from strangers. A student thanking me for showing that ethics could stand against greed. A mother relieved that her children's privacy might be safer. A fellow whistleblower who said, "Your courage gave me the strength to speak." Each message was a reminder that I had not screamed into a void. My voice, buried for years, was finally being heard. Then came the knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find my mother, her eyes swollen, her posture uncharacteristically small. She clutched a handkerchief as though it could shield her from the weight of what she was about to say. For a long moment we simply stared at each other, mother and daughter, bound by blood and broken trust. Then her voice cracked. "Elena, I was wrong." The words hung in the air, fragile, dangerous. Tears slid down her cheeks as she stepped closer. "I let your father dictate too much. I convinced myself keeping peace was love, but all I did was let them silence you. I see it now. I see you." A storm of emotions surged inside me. Anger, grief, longing. For years I had begged silently for her recognition, and now, when the empire lay in ruins, she offered it. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to tell her it was too late. Another part, softer, whispered that even belated truth was still truth. I stood frozen, torn between fury and compassion, my own tears blurring the woman before me. I couldn't embrace her, but I couldn't send her away either. We stayed suspended in that unbearable middle ground, a mother's apology colliding with a daughter's wounds. That night, I realized healing wouldn't come in grand gestures, but in what I chose to build next. Destruction had done its work. Now, creation had to follow. With Aaron's guidance and the journalists' network, I gathered a small team: engineers, ethicists, advocates. They weren't dazzled by fortune or legacy. They were united by conviction. We called it Phoenix Labs, not to celebrate my fall, but to honor the rise that could follow. Our mission was clear: to design AI that uplifted, not oppressed, to create systems rooted in transparency, dignity, humanity. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to be seen within someone else's empire. I was shaping something that bore my own name, my own principles. Months later, I stood on a global stage, no longer in the shadow of Marcus or my father. Lights shone down, but this time they didn't blind me. They revealed me. I spoke to an audience that stretched across continents, live-streamed into classrooms, boardrooms, kitchens. "Justice is not about destroying the wicked," I said, my voice steady, "but about building what is right. We cannot settle for tearing down corrupt systems without planting better ones in their place. Freedom is not absence, it is presence. It is creation." The applause was not thunderous, but it was real, earned. Afterward, I walked alone through the corridors of Phoenix Labs. The walls were bare, the furniture simple, but the energy pulsed with beginnings. My team laughed in a nearby office, debating features of a prototype, their voices carrying a harmony I had never known in the Hartley halls. They weren't my subordinates. They were my chosen family. A family built not from blood, but from trust. In the early dawn, I climbed to the rooftop. The city spread out before me, its skyline painted with the first hues of sunrise. I leaned against the railing, inhaling air cool with promise. For once, the silence wasn't emptiness, it was peace. I hadn't won a war, I had simply stepped out of one. The Hartley name would remain scarred, my father unrepentant, Marcus vanished into obscurity. But I was no longer their shadow, their scapegoat, their forgotten daughter. The sun broke over the horizon, gilding the glass towers in gold. I closed my eyes and let the warmth settle into me. This wasn't victory in the way the world defined it. It was something rarer, more enduring. It was the quiet triumph of finally being myself.